Biggest secret to success is being a great question asker. And the more questions, and by the way, the tougher they are, the better.
Welcome to The Foundry, where leaders are forged daily. Each week, we investigate themes of leadership, entrepreneurship, and mindset with some of the greatest minds in real estate. And now, the data scientist of real estate, George Roberts.
All right, welcome back, investors. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Joel Friedland. He has a 42-year track record in industrial real estate, co-founded 𝐼𝐶 Realty Partners in 1991, where he oversaw hiring and mentoring 60 industrial real estate professionals, many of whom became his partners. His group sold the firm to an international real estate company in 2014, and Joel started Brit Properties. As an industrial real estate broker and owner, Joel has secured over 2,000 industrial property leases and sales, totaling over $2 billion in brokerage volume and $250 million in acquisitions. His greatest accomplishment is maintaining valued relationships with brokers, tenants, and investors spanning 5 decades. He does fully syndicated deals, often with 0% debt. We're going to talk about that in a minute. An unheard of approach in real estate, which caters to his wealthy investors, primarily concerned with conservation of principal. His experience during the Great Recession in 2008 has informed his investment approach to be hyper-conservative, while still allowing an 8% cash return plus upside for his investors. Well, with that, I'd like to welcome to the show, Joel.
Thank you. It is nice to be with you today.
Well, it's great to be with you, and it's always good to talk to people who have a different approach, because that's what the Foundry is all about. It's about learning and growing, and I hope our investors get a lot of great takeaways today. So I usually like to just kick it off by saying, when you're at a cocktail party and somebody asks you, what do you do? How do you answer?
I say I'm in industrial real estate, and they say, what does that mean? And I said, well, we manage and own buildings that are manufacturing and distribution buildings. So then I look at them and I say, hey, do you need a warehouse?
Good, I love it. Well, but it's not just the type of buildings you buy, but how you buy them, which I think is interesting. So let's start with a direct approach. I know a lot of people, they go through brokers, or maybe they send out postcards, but you actually like to talk directly to the owner. So tell us, why do you do that? How do you make that work for you?
Yeah, sure. So we've bought approximately 100 buildings in the past 4 decades, all industrial, almost all in Chicago. And the one thing that I can look back on the track record and tell you is probably the most interesting is that 70 of the buildings were acquired door to door on the street canvassing.
Mhm.
So the members of my group, including myself at age 64, I literally get in the car and I drive out to an industrial park, and I park the car on the street, and then I walk up and down the street, and I stop in at industrial buildings to see if I can meet the owners of the companies, which are often the owners of the buildings, because a lot of them are owner occupied by the companies that the tenants actually lease the buildings from the owner of the company. So it's like a lease from someone's self to someone's self.
Right.
And I asked them, hey, you want to sell your building? And often they say, come on in, let's talk. And it leads to nothing but a conversation. But 70 times, I and my investor, my co-investors, who are sometimes my partners, I've got a great story for as an example. We bought 3 buildings for $13 million on the Chicago River on October 19th of last year. One of my investors is a young guy in his 30s, and his whole family invests with me. His grandfather, his mother's sisters, his cousins, and they've been with me for about 20 years. And I took this 35-year-old fellow and his mother to see these buildings that we were buying. And I said to him, it was a Saturday morning, and I said, let me ask you a question, Ari. Have you ever made a cold call? He said, no. He's a paralegal.
Mhm.
So he didn't even know what I was talking about. So there was a building directly across the street from the three buildings that we bought. And the three buildings, 40,000 feet, 20,000 feet, and 20,000 feet, occupied by a company that makes fruit juice concentrate called Tampico.
Mhm.
So I said to Ari, look, there's an open overhead door on the building across the street. Let's go together. So we walked in this door. It's very risky. You could get shot. You can get attacked by a dog. And there's a guy standing there. And I said, are you the owner? He said, yes, I am. My name is Armando. I said, Armando, would you consider selling this building? He said, it's on the market.
Wow.
I said, but there's no sign. There's no for sale sign. He said, I just don't want anyone to know that I'm leaving because my company has a lot of customers and I don't want to alert them or upset them or lose them. So I said, I'd like to buy the building. He said, let me give you the phone number of the broker. So I called the broker, this guy, Paul, and I said, hey, I'd like to buy the building. And he said, great, we'd love to sell it. We closed 30 days later and we now own the building and Armando is our tenant, leasing it back from us. It was $1 million deal. We're syndicating it to a group. The minimum investment is $25,000. And we're going to make probably about a 9% cash on cash return as cash flow and probably keep it for 10 years, 20 years. No debt. Just fully cash equity.
Love it. Well, yeah, we definitely have to talk about that in a minute. But I do want to talk just a little bit more about the direct approach because I mean, it seems that industrial or office that it works a whole lot better because, like you said, you do have a lot of times it's owner occupied or your tenant is, you know, again, you have a relationship between two companies, which is really run by the same person,
Yeah.
same ownership. So does this, do you think this works for other types of commercial real estate or would you say, I mean, could this work in, say, office space, for example?
No, no, office buildings are generally multi-tenant buildings.
Yeah.
There are a lot of also multi-tenant industrial buildings, but industrial is the one area where there are large buildings occupied by a single tenant or a single owner. They love having their own building, no common walls, no fighting for parking spaces when they get there in the morning. It's their own building and it's on a net lease, which means the tenant pays the taxes, insurance, maintenance, and utilities. There's no other asset class in real estate that's quite like that, except for single family homes. But a single family home might be worth 300 or 500,000. An industrial building, in our case, our average acquisition is about 3 million.
Right, right. Very cool. And yeah, just gotta love it. But okay, you said with cash, just cash, you're not leveraging this at all. So I think that we sort of hinted at that in the introduction, but tell us why you do that and you know, why does it make sense financially to buy with zero leverage?
Well, our number one most important priority is financial safety of our capital. I am 64 years old and I went through 4 downturns since 1981 when I first got in the business. And I know what happens with the market. It doesn't always go up. You know, there's a sign on a friend of
It
mine.
doesn't. Come on, can you say that again for some of our younger listeners?
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen values go down 4 times. And right now, especially in industrial's been really hot. Values are up 50% in the last 4 years and rents are up 80% in some buildings. And this can't go on forever. It's good. It might go on for a while. Industrial's doing well because of the internet, because people who sell over the internet need a warehouse. Amazon's the perfect example. They have millions and millions of square feet of warehouse space. But manufacturers need space. If you look at I've got a microphone here. This microphone probably has 300 components in it. And every one of them is made in an industrial building someplace, whether it's in this country or in Mexico or in China. And so every single product, you see the old-fashioned phones on my desk, probably 400 components in there, and the lighting in the back. Everything comes from an industrial building. So industrial's been hot because manufacturing is always needed. That's been true for literally thousands of years. People have put products together to be used in their daily life. And it's just a matter of how modern the facility is. Now, we buy buildings that are Class B, that are a little bit older, a little bit smaller. They're not quite the same as those brand new, beautiful Class A industrial buildings you see on the side of the tollway. We love 20 and 30,000 foot buildings because there are many more tenants and buyers for that size than there are for 300,000 square feet. And so all cash is because I've been burned. Whenever I've had debt, when things get bad, it makes me very, very nervous. We've had 10 losses of one kind or another over the years out of the 100 buildings. And the way to avoid a loss is to never be under pressure to sell, which means having immense staying power. And there are a bunch of very wealthy people who don't need to be buying into this BS that every deal has to have an 18 IRR or a 20 IRR. Those are made up numbers based on hope. And the reality is, if you look at history, the average return on real estate, including cash flow and appreciation, is probably closer to 12 to 14%. And if someone can safely make 12 to 14% with say a 7 or 8% cash flow, who wouldn't want it? That's a conservative, wealthy person looking to get income and not lose their money.
I love it. I think some of the best investing approaches have been informed by difficult times. I know my favorite investor, Benjamin Graham, the intelligent investor, he had to get whacked pretty hard by the Great Depression before he came back and said, look, we're going to do things differently, founded value investing. So very good. And thank you for that. We probably need a few more conservative voices out there when it comes to what we're willing to purchase and at what price.
I'll give you a statistic. It's based on estimates, but there are approximately 4,000 syndicators in the United States who have more than $50 million of equity under management. They may have a lot more in value of properties, because if your leverage is 75% and you've got 50 million of equity, that means $200 million of properties. But of the 4,000 that are out there that are syndicators who have investors that place 100,000 with them, 50,000, whatever it is, there's only one that does all cash, no debt deals, and you're looking at them. People think I'm an idiot. A lot of my friends in real estate say, well, if you don't leverage, it's not real estate. Why would you be in real estate if you're not leveraging? And the answer that I give them is, I'm not against leverage. You can do it. And I think people should invest with leverage. They just shouldn't do it with me, because I'm against that for my portfolio, because I believe that the ultimate luxury is staying power. You've heard the old saying, I'd like to have FU money. That's where someone has so much money that if someone tells them they don't like something they're doing, they say, F you, I've got enough money that I don't care.
Oh, yeah.
So we don't have FU money, but we have FU staying power, which means no bank is breathing down our neck if we have a vacancy. And nobody's putting us in the workout department. Do you know about the workout department? Every lender has one. And that's when a deal goes bad.
Yeah, if you need a modification.
Or if they're coming after you and they're saying, hey, you're not paying your payments, you're not paying your mortgage payments, or hey, your maturity is in 6 months and we're worried. They can put you in workout because they're worried about you. That in the Laser Pro documents, which is what most banks use, there are 8 clauses in every loan document that we negotiate out, because one of them is called an insecurity clause. That's where the bank says, we feel insecure, so we're putting you in workout. Another one is, if you default on a different loan, not only at that bank, but at any bank, they can put you in default because you have a third-party default.
Right.
There's 8 of them, and every one of them is obnoxious, and you're a slave to the bank. If anything goes wrong, the bank owns you, and they'll tell you what you're going to do, including forcing you to sell at a loss if they need to get their money back and they don't want to renew the loan and you can't get a loan anyplace else. So that's just for us. I am a big fan of making a lot of money in real estate with leverage. That's for young guys. That's for people who have money to burn. That's for people who are gamblers. Let them all do that. That's great. But my group won't.
Yeah. Love it. Well, let's get back to industrial, because I know a lot of our listeners out here, either syndicators or passive investors in multifamily. So you mentioned you like B class. That's where you're finding the best deals, the best opportunities. You're still getting some decent cash returns, some decent overall returns. So I'm not sure if you really fully fleshed out exactly why are you in B class, and what exactly are you looking for? Because I know there's so many things. Industrial is really heterogeneous. I mean, you mentioned warehouses, you mentioned manufacturing, but everything, even cloud computing, right? All these companies like Amazon, they need giant warehouses for that, not just to store stuff.
Yeah. So when I first got in the business, which was working for a family that owned 84 industrial buildings, they owned every kind of building. They owned new ones that they had developed. They owned large warehouses in the hundreds of thousands of square feet. And industrial, we call anything over 200,000 square feet is big box industrial. Mm-hmm. And I saw my mentor in the business, Milt Podolsky, who was brilliant and great and wealthy, and everything about him made sense, except he bought a 300,000 square foot building and it sat vacant for 2 years in 1981 when I met him. And he said, I need you to go find me a tenant. I know you know how to cold call. I was in my 20s. And I went cold calling in Alsip, Illinois to find a tenant for this 300,000 square foot building that was vacant. And I learned who should own those big buildings. Not Milt Podolsky, not us. Those should be owned by pension funds and insurance companies, where the check of 50 or 100 million to them is like a check for me of 100,000, because it's a different arena. So we don't like those big buildings for us. They're too much pressure if they go vacant, because we're just not that big. You know, we're a boutique group, and we own 19 buildings right now. Our average size building is 25,000 square feet. A B industrial building would have 2 loading docks. Let's say it's a 20,000 foot building, 2 loading docks, 30 car parking in the front, not in the back, because the office is also in the front, and we want just a small amount of office. In 20,000 feet, we'd like 10% office at the most, which is 2,000 feet. And in 2,000 feet, 10 people probably work there. They want to park near the front door of the office. They don't want to park in the back and walk all the way around the building. So if you could picture a brick building with windows across the front being the office, the truck docks over on the side, the parking in the front or on the side, not in the back, ceiling height of about 18 feet clear so they can have racks and stack their product up like warehousers do. Great HVAC system, that's really important. Really good roof. We don't want leaky roofs. That's our typical building. And we've got 15 between the size of 10,000 feet and 33,000 feet. It's perfect.
Yeah, great. So what you're really looking for is something, I guess, for lack of a better term, sort of middle of the road, something that's very easy to keep occupied. And you're not looking for, I mean, I know you say you're in some niche markets. I want to talk about that too, but you're not looking for anything exotic like rail serve, or are you? I mean, no. Just
no, most companies don't need rail, but the ones who do are usually in these bigger buildings.
Yeah, got
an
it.
industrial park in the Chicago area in Elk Grove Village, right next to O'Hare Airport. And in the 1960s, when the park was developed, it was hundreds and hundreds of acres. They came in and immediately put rail in to connect the entire park so that every building would have access to rail in the back of the building. And I would say 10% maybe of them use the rail.
Mhm.
In our business, everything is delivered by truck, not by rail. Now, the rail may come in from the port, it may come in from the West Coast or the East Coast. And then in Chicago, they unload it and they take the containers and they bring their products to our buildings. But no, we are so laser focused on just those size buildings. And our tenants, we've got local entrepreneurs, families that have owned a business for decades. Many of them have sold out to private equity. We have many private equity tenants. But we also have AT&T in a building in 20,000 feet. We've got the US Postal Service in 17,000 feet. We've got Instacart in 7,000 square feet. We've had companies like General Motors and Maytag, but the local manufacturing companies owned by families were started by their grandpa.
Mhm.
Very few manufacturing companies are being started right now. Most of them are already in existence, and most of them are owned by private equity.
So what about this onshoring? We've got a great trend these days. A lot of people said manufacturing is not coming back, but because of the supply chain issues, we've seen it come back really very quickly. And how is that impacting your business? What sort of trends should we look out for?
It's great. There's companies that used to make products, they would engage a factory in China. And for a while, there was a sucking sound of all of our manufacturing jobs and all of our manufacturing people and companies going to China because they could make the same product that they made here in Chicago or in New Jersey or in Dallas. They could make the same products in China with cheaper labor, cheaper costs all the way around. And a product might cost $10 to make here, and in China it would cost $5. But the supply chain difficulties during COVID taught a lot of companies, if they don't have products in their warehouse and the supply chain gets interrupted, they're pretty much out of business. So what they've said is, let's bring stuff back. Let's make things and distribute products in the States. And by the way, a lot in Mexico. Mexico is a less expensive place to make and distribute products, and they have a thriving industrial real estate business down there. But it doesn't require a container ship going through the Panama Canal. It's just a truck driving on the highway through Texas, Arizona, California. So Mexico is doing a lot of this onshoring. We're doing a lot here too in the United States. I would say that maybe 20 companies have landed in Chicago that may have been in some other country. But it's not as rosy as that because China's been tough. There's a lot of political risk with China because things are kind of iffy with the United States and China if you watch the news. A lot of these companies are now moving their production to India and to Vietnam. But some are bringing it back. And some are doing a combination. They're bringing some of it back here and doing some of it in one of those other countries. So it's really an international, global supply chain world. But the Chicago industrial market has 1.5 billion square feet of space and 16,000 buildings. And Chicago is a great city. It always will be. We don't have earthquakes. We don't have fires. We don't have hurricanes. It's a little cold in the winter, but the labor here is good. And there's a stock of buildings that companies can choose from. So that's why we are here. I just happen to be a resident of Chicago. I grew up here, and it turns out that I landed by accident at age 22 in the best industrial real estate market in the country. Maybe the Inland Empire in California might be the best, and maybe the tri-state area, New Jersey, New York might be the best. But there are three major gigantic markets where the velocity of deals is just continuous. And Chicago's right in the middle of all of it with rail availability and trucking lines with the tollways. So we like little buildings that we can fill up. We're not competing against pension funds. And we feel so comfortable and we can sleep at night with no debt.
Yeah, beautiful. And you also got Lake Michigan there. I mean,
Oh,
again, maybe not so much of a factor for the smaller companies, but you got to ship it out one way or the other.
Lake
Whenever you're
Michigan's good.
making
The
great
fresh
stuff.
water. Yeah, the fresh water. Food companies need gallons and gallons and gallons of water every hour.
Mhm.
That's why so many of them manufacture products here.
Yeah, great, great. I'm a Michigander. I love the Great Lakes.
Yeah.
Uh, Beautiful to have the unsalted sea all around us. But what about some of the challenges? Because a lot of people would say, like, oh man, Chicago, you invest in Chicago, you know,
Yeah. We have
big
high tax.
city. I mean, essentially not growing like certain parts of our country. I'll just paint the negative picture for a
Yeah.
second. I'll let
Yeah,
you,
sure.
take it from there.
Yeah. It's definitely a high tax area, high real estate tax and high income tax. But almost every state where there are big cities have that problem. New York's got that problem.
Mhm.
LA's got that problem. We have another big negative here, which is the weather is really crap in the winter. If Chicago had the weather that Phoenix or LA has in the winter, it would be the biggest city in the United States because our downtown is thriving and we're cultural here and there's a huge population, but there's also crime in big cities. So
Yeah.
you read about the crime in Chicago. Yeah, every big city. I'm not sure which is the worst one, but I wouldn't go in the most dangerous neighborhood at night, walking around like saying, "Hey, I'm going to walk my dog in the worst neighborhood." You could get killed. So
Yeah.
there is crime, but for the same reason that big cities attract a lot of people, some of the people that it attracts, unfortunately, are members of gangs or whatever. They were born here and they can't get out of the cycle of poverty. So there are areas here that are very tough. We don't like buying buildings in tough neighborhoods because we like to feel safe. We like our tenants to feel safe.
Right.
We bought one building. We bought 100,000 square feet in 2004 on Roosevelt Road on the west side in an area called Lawndale, which if you read the papers every Sunday about the shootings that happen in Chicago, there's almost always one in Lawndale. And when we bought the building, we hired a broker, a woman, Sally, and she went down and saw the building and she said, "I'm so excited. I'm going to be your leasing agent for this building that you just bought." And on a weekend, she talked to her dad, and her dad knows the Chicago area well. And on Monday, she called me and she said, "Joel, it's Sally. I can't be your agent. My dad won't let me go to that neighborhood." I told him about it over the weekend. He said, "Oh no, Sally, that's a dangerous place." So what's happened, we bought that building for 4.5 million when it was a horrible, scary, terrible neighborhood. That's where you make big bucks. You buy something in the path of development. That building
Right.
happens to be in a place that's totally changed since 2004. We've had it for 20 years. It's currently worth 15 or 16 million. So it's gone up in value 3.5 or 4 times since we bought it. And the rents have gone up from $4 a foot to about $8 a foot. They've doubled. And our return is outrageously good. And we're so happy we own it. But I still wouldn't go there at night.
Makes sense. Well, you mentioned your leasing agent. I love that because I know that another unique approach that you take is that you often work to in a direct way, just like you do with buying the properties, to keep them leased up. That's a huge issue with industrial, right? Because you even in a large industrial, you might have one or a few tenants. I mean, that's I think what keeps a lot of people up at night. It's not like a multifamily with 100 units.
Yeah. Yeah. Vacancies are our biggest risk. If we're vacant, we're paying the insurance, the taxes, the maintenance, and the utilities. And so let's say that we buy a building for $100 a square foot. If it's leased, we might get $7 or $8 a foot in rent. So that's great. But if it's vacant, we're getting no rent. Plus, we're probably in the city at least because the taxes are high, paying $3 or $4 a foot to carry it. So if we buy a 20,000 square foot building, it's going to cost us somewhere around $75,000 or $80,000 to carry it vacant. Luckily, we don't have to pay a bank, and luckily we keep reserves so we can cover those things. But that sucks. And that's where the big risk is. If a tenant leaves one of our buildings and it sits vacant for months, that's bad. Then we also have to pay brokerage fees to the broker that brings us a deal. Almost every industrial company is represented by a buyer's rep or a tenant's rep. There's a group called the Society of Industrial and Office Realtors, and there's about 4,000 members in the United States, and those are really experienced brokers who know industrial well, and everybody has a relationship with a tenant. So they bring us the tenants most of the time. We usually pay a commission to a broker, and we usually hire a broker to represent us to lease it, but we help them by cold calling the area ourselves. My partner, my son, when we have a vacancy coming up, we just hit the neighborhood and we talk to all the neighbors. And sometimes we call our broker and say, hey, we found somebody. We're going to give you their name and number. Go call them, go see them. They might be a good tenant. So we are really hands-on.
Yeah, gotta love it. Yeah, again, that's I think a major reason why a lot of people don't go into industrial, but a great place to be. Just takes a little, maybe a lot more on the ball, I think, to get the ball moving. But all right, so essentially what you're doing in many cases amounts to a sale and lease back, right? You got a company and maybe they got to shore up their balance sheet. I know that with office space, this is huge. You've got these medical tenants and they don't want to own the building. That's one of the things that, I mean, do you see some parallel here? Do you have people that are just, or is it mainly people who maybe in their better days decide, hey, we ought to go and make a corporate headquarters, and then they decide like, whoa, this is too much, and then they've got to do the sale lease back.
Okay, so yes, there are sale leasebacks, companies that want to take the building off their balance sheet and get cash in their pockets. That's a sale leaseback. We love those. They're great. They don't happen very often in our business, unfortunately. A little more common is, I'll give you an example of one. Tampico, which is our tenant in the buildings we just bought, where we have 1,200 feet of frontage on the Chicago River. They have a couple buildings full of tanks and pipes and tubes, and they manufacture this goop, which is the concentrate for fruit juices. Right. They're in 50 countries and they sell fruit juice all over every place. So this is a fantastic thing. We really don't ever feel like the tenant's going to leave. They just stay and stay and stay. They've been there since 1991. But get this, the business was started by the dad. The dad and his brother were in business with their dad. And they were in a company called Home Juice in Melrose Park. They sold that company, and then the dad and his kids started the Tampico business, and they bought the building that they're in 1991. So they've been there since 1991. Now they sold the business, I don't know for how much, I'm going to guess a fortune, to the Rockefellers out of New York and the Mellons, who had a private equity group. Private equity groups love owning companies where they manufacture stuff, where it's like a cash register every year. We make it, we sell it, we make it, we sell it. And these companies get a niche. That's what happened here. But when the private equity group bought it, they said, we don't want the real estate. We want to lease the real estate. So they leased the building back from the family. Mm-hmm. Fast forward, that was 1991 when they sold it. That company private equity group, sold it to another private equity group, which is how this works. If you watch private equity, they love buying companies. And the new one is called Houchins Industries. It's a $4 billion company. They own 500 stores, hardware stores, grocery stores, manufacturing companies, construction companies. So Houchins now owns Tampico and leases it from the family. Now, the family is a mother in Phoenix, a local son, a daughter in London, and a daughter in Hawaii. So the three kids and the mother own the building. They're leasing it to Tampico. And all of a sudden, they decide, we don't want to own the building together anymore. We want to cash out. Along comes Joel. We buy the buildings. Now Tampico is our tenant. The three kids and the mom are no longer involved. They cashed out. We gave them the $13 million. And now we have a 7-year lease with this company that we think will never leave. And they just keep paying the rent. So that's how we buy, is not so much as a sale leaseback, but a purchase from the original owner of the company that became a landlord and got tired of it.
Got it. I love it. That's a great breakdown of the industry.
All right.
All right, that's beautiful. And I just want to say, thank you. I think we've been ahead into the lightning round, but before we do, it's my favorite question before we jump into the lightning round. Okay, favorite junk food.
Oh, I have so many. Reese's Pieces. They seem like they're so small that you're not going to really gain weight. I keep them over here in my office. I keep a giant bag of Reese's Pieces.
I love it. It reminds me of the Halloween candy. My kids come to raid that every day. Every time I forget to lock the bedroom door. All right. Okay. So let's head into the lightning round. Okay. You ready, Joel?
Yeah.
Well, let's do it. So if you could be known for only one thing, what would it be?
Loyal relationships. Number one most important thing to me.
What's the greatest lesson in leadership you've learned as an entrepreneur?
Probably that the only way to be a leader is to go do something yourself that you're asking somebody else to do and be willing to do it. Not just say, hey, you go do this because I don't want to or I don't know how to.
Mm-hmm. What personal characteristic has been most pivotal to your success?
Oh, I'd say perseverance. When I got into trouble with the different downturns, especially when I had debt, sticking with it, not letting the bank take a bunch of properties back, just continuing to figure out a way to keep them so my investors wouldn't lose their money. I had one partner who said in 2009, right after the global financial crisis, he said, let's just go bankrupt and start over. We owe so much money to so many banks. And I said, no. We have to come through for the investors. If we bankrupt it, they lose everything. If we fight going forward, they'll get their money eventually. And so perseverance.
Love it. Love it. Okay, so time to inject a little randomness here. Just tell me when to stop cutting the deck.
Right there. Perfect. Okay. Okay.
All right. Where would you most like to travel?
Well, we are traveling. My wife is taking me to Africa on June 14th. And we're going first to Rwanda to play with the gorillas. And then we're going to the Serengeti in Tanzania to the Great Migration. And she's really looking forward to it. I think I'm going to be eaten by a lion.
I love it. Sounds like an extraordinary adventure. So just love it. I just love asking those questions. You never know what you're going to get.
Right.
Okay. What's one tip or trick that investors can implement in their business today?
One trick or tip that they can
Yes.
implement. Probably going deep into questions like what you're doing right now. I
Mhm.
think the biggest secret to success is being a great question asker. And the more questions, and by the way, the tougher they are, the better. Because when you assume, you make mistakes. And by asking enough questions, the tough questions, you don't have to assume very much because you've asked and you know the answers. And then you can make a decision with good judgment.
Name a book that's helped to forge you as a leader or as an entrepreneur, and let us know why.
The Four Agreements by Ruiz. It's a very short little book, and it talks about that not assuming things, making sure you ask questions and don't assume anything. Talks about making sure you always do your best, which is really important. Being impeccable with your word. When you say something, make sure that you believe it and that it comes from where your commitments are as opposed to where your BS is. Yeah, it's a great
I love this. This has all been sterling. Can you send us out with a quote to help forge our listeners as leaders and entrepreneurs?
Yes, it's not a quote. It's actually a tool, and it's one word, WAIT,
Hmm.
which stands for why am I talking when I should be listening?
I
WAIT.
love it. I love it. We're going to end it on a very pensive philosophical note. But for those that do want to reach out and talk to Joel, what's the best way to get in touch with Joel Friedland?
We have a website. It's Brit, BRIT with one T, BritProperties.com. It's named after one of our fantastic property managers. When we sold our brokerage business to Transwestern in 2014, we started a new little business, little boutique business doing the same thing. And our property manager's name was Brad. So we had to come up with a name, BRIT. Brad really is terrific.
Love the acronym, and I love the appreciation too. Joel, I want to say thank you so much for taking your time to share your knowledge and experience with our audience.
My pleasure.